Hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Lanice, and I'm the support group leader for Team Phenomenal Hope. And I want to welcome all of you to our support group meeting. We have a fabulous one today. I'm going to talk about law in a minute. I'm going to knock out some housekeeping things. I would encourage you to go to our website, teamphenomenalhope.org, to see our programs, to see our webinars, to see our support group meetings. We have everything on there. It's on YouTube. Our support group meetings are on YouTube. And you can find out about our Learn, Live, Breathe program, Let Me Be Your Lungs program. We also have a peer-to-peer program where you could get someone who, if you just want to talk sometimes, because sometimes we just want to talk. And we took some training, and everything is held confidentially. And you could connect with somebody, look at all our profiles, excuse me, and connect with somebody. Hold tight. Patient, we know this. And you could connect with somebody. And that way, you could talk to them. And we encourage you to do this. Also, we're going to have a town hall webinar next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And we're going to talk about, we have doctors and presenters who are going to talk about interstitial and lung disease, pulmonary hypertension, methamphetamine use, oxygen therapies, and much more. And we're going to have a PH patient, Eric Borstein. He's going to be presenting to share his phenomenal journey. Eric did this huge walk by himself, which is really phenomenal, to raise money for Team Phenomenal Hope. We also have a program called Unmet Needs. Now, the Unmet Needs program is a $500 micro grant for anyone, any PH patient or PH patient caregiver. And what happens with that is that if you need, maybe you can't pay for your medicine and food at the same time. You can't buy medicine with the money, but you can take the $500 and buy food. Fix your car, because you need car transportation. You got to get back and forth to your doctor. Your porch step fell off, you got to have safety. You need an air conditioner, you need clothes, maybe your whole body has changed, because we go up, we go down. Anything that is not like mani-pedi, haircut, or vacation. Those things are not a need. And it has to be a need, but it's once a month, usually given out in the first beginning of the month. So chime on to that. And it's there for PH patients. Use it. We want you to use the money. Okay, I think I hit everything I was supposed to talk about. Now I want to talk about Noah Greenspan. Noah Greenspan, honestly, is one of my favorite people. I mean, I don't talk to him all the time, but he still will always be one of my favorite people. Noah has a the Pulmonary Wellness Foundation in New York City. It is a phenomenal place, and it's not like your regular pulmonary rehab or your rehab centers where they, you just get on the treadmill, whatever. It is a place where we are monitored, one therapist at every 2 patients. We are hooked up to the thing for our blood pressure, and we get the pulse ox done, and the exercise is monitored and created for you. So Kathleen's regimen is going to be different than Beth's regiment. And so that's, and also just to let you know, and Noah's going to go over this, he has an online program that is absolutely phenomenal. Noah's going to go over more. I went for 5 years. The first time I went, short story, first time I went, I was, they first test you to see what you could do, what your abilities are. And I lasted 2 minutes on the treadmill. I thought I was going to die. Noah put me in a taxi, sent me back to Brooklyn. I cried all the way to Brooklyn. I said, I'm not doing this. But by the time I was done, years later, because I followed the program with Noah in the foundation, 5 years, I went from less than 2 minutes on a treadmill to walking 2 miles, which I have kept up with. And he is so much information. And I'm going to turn it over to Noah.
No, I'm just kidding. Good afternoon, everybody. As Lenice said, my name is Noah, and I made her cry the first time I met her. I really would love for this to be not a lecture. Although if that's what you want, I can do that. But I would really like for each one of you to leave with something that you can really put into action immediately to make your life better. So it's a small crowd, which is great. And a large crowd is great. I am not obsessed with crowd size like some people, but what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity before we start to maybe ask some questions or just give tell me what you'd like to get out of this lecture. Like tell me how I can help you, and then we'll get started. And I'm happy to talk about on any subject that I know something about. So if you don't mind, if anyone has any questions that they want to get answered today or anything specific they want to talk about, please feel free to share. Let's get started. So let's talk in general for a minute about exercise, and then we'll go into exercise with pulmonary hypertension. So when we talk about exercise in general, like there are really four factors or four variables that we can change. And by the way, if anyone has any questions or doesn't understand something, stop me in the middle. I'm okay with that. So there are four variables that we can change to create an exercise program for somebody. And those four variables are thought of as FIT, F-I-T-T. So what
Oh, okay.
what that stands for is frequency, intensity, time, and type. So you could change the frequency, how often should you exercise? You can change the intensity, how hard should you work out? You should change the time, how long should you work out for? And you could change the type of exercise you do. So what kind of exercise should you do? So when it comes to pulmonary hypertension, when I first started treating pulmonary hypertension patients, it was like decades ago. And at that point, it was very, very careful. It was like, treated like a time bomb. Like, whatever you do, don't scare Lenice. You know how she gets. Or, whatever you do, don't do too much of this and too much of that. And unquestionably, there are caveats to all exercise programs. But it's a similar scenario to pulmonary fibrosis, which is that when I started seeing these patients in the 90s, they were told they were too sick for exercise or they were too sick for rehab. And to me, too sick for exercise or too sick for rehab means go home and wait to die. And if you are living your life, and if you're going out and you're going to the grocery store, or you're doing this or you're doing that, or even if you're just, making the most of being at home, then you have to do some kind of activity. So there's nobody who could just simply lie in bed and do nothing. Although, 50 years ago, the protocol, like after you had a heart surgery, was lie in bed, make sure you don't move too much. If you need a drink, somebody raises the cup to your mouth and gives you a straw. And and basically you were asked to just stay as still as possible. And then what we found was that actually caused more complications than getting people up and moving, but it's got to be done in the right way. So first, let's talk about frequency, right? So let's talk about frequency. So how often do you think you're supposed to exercise? And we'll talk a little bit about exercise and activity and the differences between like activities of daily living and a formal exercise program. But how often do you think you should exercise? Don't all answer at once. For
Four
those
times
of
Every
a week.
you,
day.
2 times a week, say,
Every
raise your
day.
hand. Well, not necessarily as much as possible, but every day. Okay. And the reason why I say as much as possible is because you don't want to get to like within inches of your life, during the exercise program. So what's really important is that we try to have some type of daily activity. So the body gets good at doing what you ask it to do. So if you ask it to sit on the couch, flip the remote, eat chips, the body will reward you with low muscle tone, more fat, less efficient heart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you ask it to get moving, it's going to get moving. Now, it's not going to be instantaneous. So it's not like today we start and tomorrow you feel better. Okay. Especially if you've been inactive for a while, it's going to take a little while. And you also don't start at the level we hope to achieve. So in other words, if our ultimate goal is to walk for 15 minutes on the treadmill, we're not necessarily going to start there today, right? We want to start, I always say, throw a pebble, let the pool ripple, let the pool come back to calm. And if you feel good and everything's okay after that, you can continue on. Now, of course, before you begin any type of exercise program, clear it with your doctor, okay? And, we want some guidelines, okay? We want some understanding of who you are, what your condition is, what your limitations may or may not be, and what parameters we want to, abide by during exercise. And we could talk about some of those, but frequency, daily exercise, ideally, okay? Anything I'm going to tell you today I'm not preaching to you. I'm not judging you. I'm not saying do what I do what I say, not what I do. I'm just giving you information. So, I'm not, most things I know I learned from doing them wrong the first time. So don't feel like I'm judging you or saying like, hey, you lazy bum, get off your butt and, do some exercise. The goal is to get you moving. So when we talk about time of exercise, okay, that's going to be variable. But what I'm going to talk about ultimately is going to be a program that starts with very low time, okay, and then builds you up to more time. So this is not an advertisement, okay? It's not an infomercial like you see a lot these days, but we do have a free online rehabilitation program called Pulmonary Wellness Boot Camp, and it starts off with 4 minutes of exercise. But what I say on the first day is if you can't do 4 minutes of exercise, do 2 minutes and 2 minutes. And if you can't do 2 minutes and 2 minutes, you do 1 minute and 1 minute and 1 minute and 1 minute. If I can quote the great Martin Luther King Jr., okay, he says, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. And I added, and if you can't crawl, then breathe. But whatever you do, just keep moving forward. And it's almost doesn't matter, like Nike says, just do it. Like the question could be like, what is it? My question is just do something. Okay. And as long as you start something today or tomorrow, okay, that's the initial point. Okay. There's another famous Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago. The second best time is today, meaning don't worry about what you've been doing for the last 25 years. Don't beat yourself up because you would have, you should have, you could have done this, blah, blah, blah. No, wherever we are today, that's the only place we can start from. And if you're not doing anything yet, I encourage you to start. And if you are doing something, then, I encourage you to continue, but maybe you'll learn something today that might help you modify in a better way. And then the other thing is type of exercise. Okay. So frequency, intensity, time, and type. Any questions so far? Pretty simple, right? Really great point and question and very interesting subject. Thank you for that. So let's talk about that. So, what I like to do is I learn 95% of what I know, I learned from watching House MD. Okay. If you watch House, you can learn a lot about medicine. Okay. But what I like to do is I like to get all the information and then chop it up and see what we're talking about here. Okay. So you said as long as you're walking, no problem. Okay. But if you start to introduce arms and legs, then it starts to become a problem. And you have ILD and you have pulmonary hypertension. So here's the thing. So I'm going to just tell you what the factors are involved here. So number one, we have an interstitial lung disease, right? So before I even say that, I'm just going to say this. How your body uses oxygen is based on three main factors. Okay. Number one, how good are your lungs at moving oxygen in and out? How good is your heart at pumping blood? How good are your muscles at utilizing oxygen? So in your case, we have 2 out of 3, right? And these two things conspire to affect the third one, right? So we have interstitial lung disease where we have difficulty moving air in and out. And we also have difficulty with diffusion where oxygen import is impaired, right? We have pulmonary hypertension where we have a problem with the pumping of the heart. And whereas, just to characterize a difference between pulmonary hypertension and what people, generally talk about hypertension, which is systemic hypertension, which is the high blood pressure that people talk about every day. High blood pressure or essential hypertension is the pressure in the peripheral body, okay? And the left ventricle is what pumps to the body. And that's what's affected. So if you have high blood pressure for a long time, the left ventricle has to work harder to overcome that pressure. Now, with pulmonary hypertension, it's different, okay? In pulmonary hypertension, we have increased pressure in the pulmonary circulation, and the right side of the heart is typically the low pressure side of the heart, and the left side of the heart is typically the high pressure side of the heart, because the left side has to pump to the whole body and the right side only has to pump a few inches to the lungs, right? And so the thing is that when you have high pressure in the pulmonary circulation, the right ventricle has to work hard, except that the right ventricle and the valves that surround the right ventricle, which are the pulmonic valve below and the tricuspid valve, above, in between the ventricle and the atrium, those are low pressure valves, right? So it's like we want to run a high pressure system, but we only have a low pressure hose and we only have low pressure equipment. And that's why right-sided heart failure is very, very common, because this side of the heart is not meant for those kind of pressures. It's like if you watch like Power, they'll be like, you ain't made for this kind of life. Like the right side of the heart is not made for those kind of pressures. That's where the problem comes in. So, Tris, that's where the beginning is, right? Now, the number one symptom of pulmonary hypertension and the number one symptom of interstitial lung disease is shortness of breath, right? How many people here experience shortness of breath? Raise your hand. Okay. So typically when people start to get short of breath, it happens at high levels of activity. So in New York City, the things that I hear most are walking up the subway stairs, walking uphill, and I know patients that can map out the neighborhood by where there's a place to sit down. I know other patients who can map out the neighborhood by where there's a public restroom they could use. And then, running for the bus or walking quickly. So I call that the New York City triathlon. So the pulmonary triathlon. So it's like you run up a flight of subway stairs, walk up a hill, run for the bus. But the problem with shortness of breath is it typically will happen at high levels of activity at first. So walking upstairs, walking uphill, walking fast. And the problem is that typically when people start to get short of breath at these high levels of activity, they find ways to avoid the activities. So maybe you don't take the subway anymore. Maybe you take the bus or a taxi or car service, or you drive. You go down the blocks that don't have a hill on them. You avoid places where you're going to have to walk up and down stairs. And the problem with that is that even though it makes you more comfortable and prevents that discomfort right off the bat, all of the muscles that you use and all of the systems that you use to do those activities become deconditioned, they become less efficient, and then you start to get short of breath at lower levels of activity. And now, guess what? Now I'm getting short of breath on flat surfaces. And so now I'm not walking as much. And then I decondition further, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. And this is known as the dyspnea spiral, okay, or the shortness of breath spiral, okay? But the good news is that if you engage in bad behaviors or don't engage in good behaviors, no judgment implied, I'll say helpful or less helpful, okay? In the same way that you can spiral downhill, if you start to add in good stuff or start to eliminate bad stuff, then you can start working your way back up the hill again. And a lot of times I see people who are either more short of breath or less short of breath, and there's no change in their pulmonary function, or there's no change in their heart function, or there's no change in their pulmonary hypertension, right? Or their pulmonary artery pressures. So what that tells you is that there have to be other things besides just the lungs and besides just the heart and besides just the muscles that make us more or less short of breath. Does that make sense to everybody? So now here's another thing, okay? When you exercise, okay, what happens to the body is that blood goes to the working muscles, okay? So if I'm doing an upper body ergometer or I'm boxing, the body will deliver blood flow to the muscles that are working. And what it's going to do is it's going to constrict all of the other blood flow. Okay, not to nothing, but it's going to divert blood flow to the working muscles. So if you're walking, okay, it's going to divert the blood to the working muscles in the leg. The other thing about walking when you're standing up is that gravity will also pull blood down. Okay, so blood can pool in the legs. So imagine this. Imagine if your heart function is already compromised and all the blood is down in my legs. Well, that's going to make it challenging, right? Because cardiac output goes down. And here's another thing, okay? Using one arm takes less effort and metabolism than using both arms. Using arms and legs takes more than using either one alone. So if you think about it, when you're doing arms and legs, the blood is now spread out over 4 limbs instead of just 2, okay? And less is returning to a heart that's already challenged. Final thought, okay? Now, this is really interesting. This is the first time we've ever put it all together like this in all one nice, neat bow. But here's the other thing, okay? Overhead activity for anyone that's short of breath is very difficult, okay? So think about washing your hair, making the bed, showering, shaving, right? And you say, how could shaving make you short of breath, right? But overhead activity and upper body activity is particularly hard for anyone who's short of breath, because when you're using these muscles like this, it puts the respiratory muscles at a poor mechanical advantage. Okay, so in your case, we're using arms, legs, and upper body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're really challenging your body in all the possible ways. So it's no wonder that you have difficulty with that. But here's the good news: it can get better. Okay, now let me just make one more point. Okay, so when my arms are moving like this is what I call open chain activity, meaning that my arms are free to move around in space, right? Now, check this out. I told you that this puts the respiratory muscles at a poor mechanical advantage because my thorax is fixed and my arms are moving all around this. But check this out. If I fix my upper extremities, meaning if I lean forward on something, right, I'm closing the chain. Or if I'm sitting in a chair and I put my elbows down on my knees and I lean forward, I'm closing the chain. And when we close the chain, now our upper body becomes the fulcrum, and the muscles of the chest, the back, the shoulders, the thorax all work in their reverse action to help elevate the rib cage and take a deep breath. Great question. So the breath work associated with it is dependent, okay? So there's no type of breathing, like people always say, what's the best breathing technique? Okay, so there's no type of breathing that's going to work best for every person in every situation, right? And even for the same person in different situations. So in other words, the breath work that I might say to you while walking in up and down your hallway might be different than the breath work that you do when walking uphill or climbing a flight of stairs. But we need an initial ink stroke, right? So the initial ink stroke is this. Number one, in an ideal world, we want to breathe in through our nose. Why do we do that? Okay, breathing in through your nose serves 3 functions. Number one, it warms the air. Number 2, it humidifies the air. Number 3, it filters the air, right? So the body wants things, the body likes what's called homeostasis. And that means it likes the body to be at 98.7 degrees, and it likes it to be at a certain pH, and it likes it to have a certain level of oxygen and a certain level of carbon dioxide. And the thing about that is that when you breathe in through your nose, it's trying to get the air that you're breathing in to be most like the air that's already inside your body, right? So like, how many people have the experience of like, you're feeling fine, but you go out on a freezing cold day, and as soon as that cold air hits you, you're like, ugh, and you're already short of breath, right? Because that's too cold for the body to warm up, but it gives you a little plus to breathe in through your nose. Now, If you can't breathe in through your nose, deviated septum, you have a cold, your nose is stuffed up, you have sinus issues, you have polyps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay. You could breathe in through your mouth. You have no choice, really. But the thing is, you don't want to be doing that. Panting is ineffective, right? So I'm building the case here. If you notice, what I do is I tell you information, then I go back and put it together. So the idea is we need an initial ink stroke for breathing. So my initial ink stroke for you would be to breathe in through your nose for a count of 2. So, and then blow out gently through what we call pursed lips for a count of 4. So breathing in, and then there's a little space in between, and blow 2, 3, 4. So it looks like this. So and if you're exercising, then you can do that in sync with the exercise, right? So if you're walking, each step or this could be a count. So you could breathe in, and blow 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now I say initial ink stroke. Okay. The reason being that you say to me, hey, you know what? I don't think that taking in a breath for 2 is enough for me to take a deep breath, in which case it's okay to say, let me try the inhalation for 3. And then you could try to exhale for 6, or inhale for 4 and exhale for 8. Okay. The better condition you're in, the higher the numbers will be, but it's okay to experiment. Like, there's a lot of people who try to teach breathing or claim to teach breathing, and they're very hardcore. They're very militant. It's got to be this way. It's got to be this. Okay. And it's not like that. Life doesn't work that way, right? So we have to try the way that works best for most people. And if we have to make modifications to that, we have to make modifications to that. The other thing is there's something called diaphragmatic breathing. I'm sure everybody's heard of it, right? But let me tell you this, all breathing is diaphragmatic. Okay, if unless you're paralyzed, unless you have a paralyzed diaphragm, because whether you breathe in through your nose or you breathe in through your mouth, we still have to trigger the diaphragm, right? So all breathing is diaphragmatic. And a lot of times when people teach this, they'll say, sit there and you take a breath in. And as you breathe in, your hand should rise up, and then you blow out. And as you blow out, your hand should go down. But the problem with that is that that's good, okay? It's an okay training tool to do it that way, but you can sit and do that all day, every day, but that's not going to make you better able to walk upstairs or walk up a hill or walk across the room, right? The body gets good at doing what you ask it to do. So that's a good way to learn to, incorporate your diaphragm most effectively. But in my opinion, that is not enough to be the exercise on its own for most people. Okay, so you use those things, diaphragmatic breathing, pursed lip breathing, and paced breathing, in order to do the exercise. And the exercise is what's going to make your heart more efficient. It's going to relax your blood vessels. It's going to make your respiratory system more efficient. It's going to make your muscles more efficient. And then the other thing about that is that the other thing that I was going to say also is everything I said already, magnificent, brilliant. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. But it is. But I'm just kidding. But everything I said, I stand by. But here's the other thing: oxygen, right? So here's the other thing: how many people wear oxygen to exercise? Okay. Is there anybody who doesn't wear oxygen during the day, usually, but wears it for exercise only? Okay. So if you don't use oxygen, are you able to stay saturated? So in other words, what I'm asking you is, when you're feeling short of breath, what is your oxygen saturation?
97.
Perfect. So you don't need oxygen. Okay.
I have it at night.
You have it at night. Okay, great. Is there anybody who doesn't use oxygen but finds that when they exercise or do activity, they desaturate? Like, in other words, their oxygen goes down.
I sleep at night with oxygen, and then I use it during exercise because I feel short of breath.
Okay, great. So let me point this out. So oxygen does not always correlate directly with shortness of breath. Okay. So in other words, you can be very short of breath and your oxygen could be 97%. Likewise, you cannot be short of breath at all and your saturation could be 80%. And what I tell people is to rely on your instruments. So if your oxygen is 98, but you're feeling short of breath, giving you more oxygen is not going to help you. It's like the glass is full. Anything you pour down is going to wind up on the table. Okay. And likewise, even if you're not that short of breath and but your saturation is 80%, then by all means, then you really should be wearing oxygen. And the two things that I liken this to, okay, is really scuba diving, okay, and flying a plane. So the reason why I say this is because when you're scuba diving, when you're underwater, water looks like water, and you can't tell if it's, is it 10 feet or 20 feet or 30 feet or this, that, the other thing. But you have to, you have to use a depth gauge for that. And when you're flying a plane, okay, air looks like air. So you can't tell if you're at 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet, 15, whatever. And the thing about that is you have to use an altimeter. So use your oximeter. Now, I just posted a link in the chat, and this is a link to our website, but I specifically posted the part on oxygen. And if you look, there's going to be 3 articles. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll share my screen with you for 1 second. So this is a very good looking, no, I'm just kidding. But this is the chapter on supplemental oxygen, okay? And if you go here, there are 3 articles. And in the first one called Oxygen Manifesto 1, I talk about why, what the difference between being short of breath and the difference between having low saturation. Then we talk a little bit about the different, conditions and different machines. And then there are a bunch of webinars that I have to make a note that this is not private, that this is private, but there's a bunch of webinars that talk about oxygen. But my point in telling you all this is that if you desaturate, then you really have to use oxygen during exercise. Otherwise, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. And the other thing is that if you normally wear oxygen at rest, then I would recommend, if you desaturate during exercise, turning your oxygen up. And, a nasal cannula, which is what I see people wearing, is really only effective up to about 6 liters of oxygen, right? So if you cannot stay saturated, even if you're on 6 liters of oxygen, then I recommend that you go to a mask, and that will then allow you to use even a higher concentration of oxygen. And the oxygen is not the treatment, right? But the oxygen allows you to do the exercise that will allow you to, that is the treatment. That's what's going to make your lungs more efficient. That's what's going to make your heart more efficient. And that's what's going to make your muscles more efficient. So, we use a lot of oxygen here. And I first started this around 1995 when we started seeing pulmonary fibrosis patients and pulmonary hypertension patients who, their oxygen would be 95% sitting in a chair, but then they'd stand up and it would be 90%, and then they'd take a few steps and it would be 80%. And we found that like 2 liters of oxygen, 3 liters of oxygen, 4 liters, sometimes isn't enough. And the problem with being hypoxic, which means that your oxygen is low, is that that also increases pulmonary hypertension. So if you are desaturating, then I encourage you to use as much oxygen as you need in order to maintain saturation. And then little by little, start to build up those activities for your arms and your legs. But I see no reason why that would not be something that you can do over time. Other questions?
Okay, I have one.
Sure.
PFTs.
Yes.
Can you explain why on a PFT I think it's called the DLO, DLC, whatever
DLCO.
that is, that measures the that oxygen that you're able to take in the air. What is the difference between low oxygen in the blood and um, low saturation?
So you're asking if I can explain that?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Good of you. Thank you.
Do you want me to? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, if you got time.
So listen to this. So when you're getting oxygen saturation reading, right? What you're getting is a reading of oxygen that's in your bloodstream. And the way that that works is you have one side that shines a light and the other side reads how much of that infrared light is going. And because of how much oxygen is carried on the hemoglobin and things like that. So depending on how much light gets through, that tells you what your body's saturation is. And oxygen saturation is an indirect measure of arterial blood content, or arterial oxygen saturation, right? So the only way to really know your PO2, which is, or the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood, or the PCO2, which is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, is through a blood gas, like an arterial blood gas, which are generally pretty painful. So this oxygen saturation meter, and for those of you that, say that you have cold fingers or you have a hard time getting a reading, they also make head sensors, which are pretty good. But the thing is, what DLCO is DLCO refers to diffusion capacity, okay? And what that has to do with is how the oxygen in the air, like that's not directly related. So when you do PFT, you're going to have a number of different tests. One of them is spirometry. So spirometry is breathing in and out, blah, 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 blah. And then you go into the booth, right, where they do a test where they give you a certain amount and determine the diffusion capacity. Diffusion capacity is really about how, when the air comes into your body, right, and it comes in through the lungs, and when it goes down, okay, the airways start with your trachea, then we have a right and left bronchus, then we have a right upper, middle, and lower lobe, and a left upper and lower lobe, and those bronchi branch into smaller airways called bronchioles, and those bronchioles then go to the alveoli, which are the air sacs, right? And the air sacs have blood vessels around them, an artery and a vein. And what happens is the oxygen goes in and the carbon dioxide comes out. And when the oxygen goes in through the alveoli, it goes into the bloodstream. And when the carbon dioxide comes out of the bloodstream to the alveoli, we blow it out. Okay. And in conditions like interstitial lung disease, pulmonary hypertension, where there's a real impact on how the body is able to, how the oxygen is able to diffuse across those membranes from the alveoli into the blood. And so there can be an impairment of that, right? And that's separate from, the mechanics. So there's a mechanical aspect of breathing, and then there's a chemical aspect of breathing, right? And this is the chemistry that we're talking about here. The other thing is that, I'm sorry, you mentioned one other thing that was like,
No, I just said that the oxygen, it seems like whenever I have blood work, the oxygen in my blood is low.
is low.
But that's not reflecting if I do a pulse ox. My pulse ox always seems to be normal, as you well know.
Yeah.
But the
So when
oxygen
you
in my
say the
blood
oxygen is low, can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
Because just to be clear about something,
Mhm.
let me just check one thing before I say this. So when you get a blood gas done, okay, the normal for that, okay, is 75 to 100. So when you're getting that reading, that's not your oxygen saturation, which is a percentage. What that is, that's the partial pressure of oxygen in millimeters of mercury. So 90% oxygen saturation correlates. Let me show you one other thing. Give me 1 second. So if you look, at if you look at this chart right here, okay, what you see going across the bottom is PO2, and PO2 has to do with the partial pressure of oxygen. And you see this is in millimeters of mercury. That's how you measure pressure. So like when you get a blood pressure that's 120/80, that's in millimeters of mercury. And then over here is your saturation, right? So if you look at this, here's 80% saturation, here's 100% saturation. Let me just go to 90% because that's like a classic cutoff, right? 90% oxygen saturation correlates with a PO2 of 60. So if I had to bet, I would say that the numbers that you're looking at in the blood gas are the PO2 and not your saturation. So if you have a PO2 of 60 or 70, that should correlate to an oxygen saturation somewhere in the 90s.
Mine was, I think, 40.
So 40 is on the low side, right? So if you had a PO2 of 40, I mean, I would think that you'd also see that in your saturation, okay? But again, if it was just a regular blood draw and not an arterial blood gas, then you might be getting, or if it was coming from a vein, right? That's the other thing. So most times when they get blood, it's coming from a vein, right? Or an artery. It could be a vein or an artery. But if it's venous blood, remember that that's going to be deoxygenated blood, right? And if it's arterial blood, that's going to be oxygenated. So for example, if we took the oxygen saturation in the left side of the heart, it would be much higher than if we took it in the right side of the heart, because in the left side of the heart, it's right after the blood comes back from the lungs and it's fully saturated, right? But then the left side of the heart punches it out to the body, pushes it out to the body where the muscles use it, and it becomes, we build up carbon dioxide. And so by the time the blood comes back to the right side of the heart, we're talking about venous blood and deoxygenated blood. So if it was taken in a vein, that's going to have a lower reading than a lower PO2 than if it was taken in an artery. So it's just a matter of making sure that you're looking at the parameters correctly to make sure that you're reading it properly and that you're correlating the right thing. My guess is you're probably looking at a venous puncture and you're looking at, something that would have a lower saturation there, but because you're checking the saturation in your finger after it's just come back from the left side of the heart and the lungs, it's a higher reading.
Gotcha.
Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yep, it did actually. Yep. Is there something that you could say that would apply to all of us as far as exercise and how we do things and how we don't do things? Is there like a blanket statement on this?
No.
Okay.
I mean, let me just say it like this. All the things that help your heart help your lungs. All the things that help your lungs help your heart. All the things that help your heart and your lungs help your muscles. So boot camp is designed for anyone. I mean, the overwhelming correlation between every one of my patients is that they're short of breath, right? And so we have the initial insult of the disease, and the disease causes symptoms. And then the symptoms cause behavioral problems, right? And the behavioral problems are, now I'm not going to take the stairs, and now I'm not going to walk uphill, and now I'm not going to do this. So the thing is that all of the things that will help somebody with respiratory disease should also help somebody with cardiovascular disease or peripheral vascular disease or autoimmune disease. But the reason why I say there's not a blanket statement is because guess what? There may be things that I don't know about you. So I could say, yeah, this is going to help you. But if you have a aortic aneurysm that's ready to blow, then it's not going to help you. So the program is set for somebody who's been cleared to exercise. And if you've been cleared to exercise, then the program will bring you along in a way that's manageable for the majority of people. But I always say, if you can't do this day, then you go back to the other day, or if you can't do 10 minutes, do 5 and 5, or, do what you can, and it brings you along and it teaches you the warning signs of when you should be stopping exercising or not exercising. But all the things that help heart disease and all the things that help COPD and pulmonary fibrosis and autoimmune disease and peripheral vascular disease, they are all similar, right? The principles are all similar. Sometimes we have to make adjustments, but I was thinking about this earlier today for some reason. And if there is one kind of dead set rule, right, is don't hold your breath, no matter what the exercise is, okay? Always make sure you're breathing in. And actually, that's the number one rule of scuba too, is never hold your breath. And the reason why that's the number one rule of scuba, okay, and one of the things is that I love about scuba, and I'm a scuba instructor and rescue diver, is that everything related to scuba is related to cardiopulmonary rehab. It's all the same principles. It's stay calm, it's breathe slowly in and out, it's control your movements, don't hold your breath, because when you hold your breath, that's called Valsalva maneuver. And what that does is it increases your intra-abdominal pressure, it increases your intrathoracic pressure, it increases your pulmonary artery pressures, okay? And when somebody gets in trouble underwater and they have the bends or decompression sickness, it's always either a vascular incident or a lung incident. Either their lungs overexpand and have a pneumothorax, or their vasculature overexpands with nitrogen. And the thing is that by holding your breath, it expands even more because you're underwater and the pressures are increased. So the first rule of everything is never hold your breath. That's the first rule of life, basically. So like, don't hold your breath. But there's not one kind of blanket statement, because everybody's different. And we don't want to be like, oh yeah, just do it. Oops. You know what I mean? We want to make sure that you're worked up properly and cleared for exercise. And like I said at the beginning, you know, the thing about pulmonary hypertension is that the treatments get better all the time. The treatments get better all the time. Thank God there's a lot of money being put into pulmonary hypertension. There's a lot of experts. In January, I think I'm having Evelyn Horn, who's the head of the Pulmonary Hypertension Heart Failure Institute at Weill Cornell. She, in my opinion, and there's other great doctors out there, but in New York City, if I had pulmonary hypertension, she's the person I would go to. And there's another guy named Humanpour who I would also go to. But we're going to talk about that. So definitely be on that one. You know, that's going to be something very valuable. She's a genius. Every 33 feet that we go below the water increases by 1 atmosphere. So when you go from 0 to 33 feet, the pressure doubles. So if you think about the work that your heart has to do on dry land, it gets that much more underneath. And the other thing is that air compresses as we go down, right? And it expands as we go up. That's why when you're scuba diving, you have to come up very slowly, because otherwise the air expands too quickly and causes the lung. Or nitrogen builds up in your body when you scuba dive, because you have no, you know, you're breathing a contained gas. That doesn't happen on land, but the nitrogen gets compressed. And if you come up too quickly, the nitrogen comes out of solution and causes decompression sickness. Lenice, you were going to say something?
Yes, two things. One thing that you just said, get medical clearance.
Yes.
And I think that that is important, because a lot of times I think that
Crucial.
we think we're doing a great exercise program, but maybe it might not be for us. That's one thing I did learn when I went to NOAA for the first time. What I thought
And
I was
also
doing
don't
that
get
would help
fooled
me.
by social media, right? Like everyone's an
Exactly.
expert now, okay? Like I literally am in groups where people ask a question and I give an answer, and then 20 people who are not medical professionals argue with my answer. I'm not saying you have to listen to every single thing I say. I'm just saying there's a lot of bad advice out there. And if I tell you something, it's because I've done it, okay? A long time, a lot of times, but everyone's an expert. You know how a lot of physical therapists, you know who a lot of physical therapists get business from? Personal trainers. And I don't say, I'm not like looking to, you know, downplay the personal training, but not everybody's ready. You know, like Jill Scott says, not all things are for all people, right? It's like you get a cologne, you're like, oh, that's so good. What is it? Then you put it on and it smells differently on you because of your body chemistry, right? So, you know, the internet is really is not the place to get your medical advice from.
That's right. And you know what?
Medical clearance is crucial. You know, medical clearance is crucial.
You have to. And that's why when I stressed in the beginning, the fact that when I first went there, no one evaluates you. And he lets you know what will work for you. Also, and it has been put out, this boot camp is free. Come on, it's free. You can't beat free. And you can, with the boot camp, you know, you can work your way up, but it is very important to get medical approval first, because you know what? You could be doing more damage than good.
Absolutely. Especially
so
if you have a heart condition or pulmonary hypertension, if you're doing it wrong, like, gee, you were talking about this before, like if you're exercising and your oxygen saturation is low, that's increasing the pressures in the pulmonary arteries. And then, you know, Trish talked about vascular remodeling. That can lead to a progression of pulmonary hypertension and the development of heart failure. So, you know, there's a way to do it smart. And, you know, it's not just like no pain, no gain, like the old days, right? Like if there's pain, it's probably telling you something's not right.
Absolutely. And you know what, Noah, have you been putting your information in the chat? I'm sorry, I can't.
Yes.
Okay, because please check it out, because I have to tell you, I'm giving a plug. The Pulmonary Wellness Foundation was the thing that made me absolutely start walking and doing it correctly, learning how to breathe. I miss the Christmas parties like nobody's business. I mean, the conga lines and the whole thing. I had pictures, but we can't seem to get them up right. We, in 2018.
You also lost a lot of weight since I met you,
I
haven't you?
did. I lost 105 pounds
Woo!
once I started going. And you know, and I also had a registered nutritionist dietitian. That was another thing too, because what I thought was healthy for me was not. But in 2018, Noah got a group of us together that went to the foundation, and we walked across the Brooklyn Bridge. It was like one of the best days ever. We were in wheelchairs. We were on walkers. We had oxygen. Noah's crew bought extra oxygen. And the day was not a sunny day, let me tell you. It was a cloudy little day. There we go. There's part of us.
There's Lanice.
That's me over there.
There's Lanice and a half.
That's Lanice all the way to the left. When she was a little bit chunkier.
Yep, that's my dad right there.
Yep.
That's me.
Yep.
Yep. It was a great day. Great day.
It was a great day, and it was a lot more people.
Yep.
And we just had such a great time.
Yeah, that was really one of the best days of my life. No joke. That was.
Yeah, it really, really was. And the Christmas parties. They were the best Christmas parties ever.
Trying to see if I have any other pictures.
But so Noah and I have a long history together, and I encourage everybody to go to his website because there's so much knowledge there.
I'll just show you an example of like what the rehab might look like. So let me just share this with you.
You redid it?
For a second. What's that?
You redid the let me tell you something. It's a work of art, the rehab. Yeah, it's not a normal rehab.
Okay, so I'll show you. I want to log out. Hold on. That's not what I want.
And if you ever are lucky enough to go to the foundation, well, the building where Noah's offices, it's like a work of art.
It might be a thought that I want you to think about. It might be an idea, a saying, a quote, a poem that I want you to take into your day and figure out how that relates to you. I'm going to motivate you. I'm going to do my best to get you moving. Life itself is always, life is precious, and life is something that you need to hold on to and you need to fight for. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The mind is a very, very powerful being, okay? As I said before, it can be our best friend when it's helping us. It can be our worst enemy. It is okay to not be strong all the time. It is okay to not be happy all the time. It is okay to be weak at times. We all have those moments. It's not honoring our weakness. It's honoring our humanity. The ones that are going to be the first one to be there when a friend in need is a friend indeed are often going to be the last person to ask for help. Remember that you can, and ask yourself, How much of this is real and how much of this is what I've been conditioned to believe over time? It doesn't matter where you are right this moment. This is our starting point. I said, well, what did I learn? And she said, well, maybe you learned that you're not as strong as you thought you were. And I said, well, how is that a good thing? And she said, it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a real thing. You have that cry or you do it right out in the open, I don't care. And then you get back on that horse and we're going to kick some ass together. Okay. Have a great week, my friends. Have a great week.
So that's an example of thoughts and motivations. I'm just going to show you one more 1-minute video just to get another just one more thing. I'll show you the I'm going to show you the breathing balance and flexibility training.
When you feel like no matter what you do, you cannot catch your breath and panic has set in, these are the times when it's most important to talk to yourself.
This is Tai Chi and Qigong.
Remind yourself that you know what to do and remind yourself that you have certain tricks that you can utilize, certain tools in your kit that will help you regain control of your breathing. Our goal is to break into that cycle by number one, teaching you more effective breathing techniques.
Yoga.
And I want you to breathe.
Donna Wilson. Look at her arms.
Yes. I envy those arms.
Teaching you how to exercise so that your body becomes more efficient, stronger, and better at using oxygen. We're gonna try that.
Inhale. Exhale, step out, let's back.
And then we're gonna do both arms together, breathing in. Again, as you get stronger, you can increase the time and consequently you become less short of breath. So in for 2 hours.
My one piece of advice to anybody with, whether it be chronic lung disease, kidney disease, heart disease, whatever, as long as you're receiving your optimal treatment, one thing you've got to do is keep moving.
7, again, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7.
This week, we have something a little bit new for you, something fresh. We got some new moves, we got some new steps, and after that, we're gonna give you a little bit of a soul train walk, okay? We don't live to rehab. We rehab so that you can live your life.
No joke, I just got choked up. I got some tears in my eyes because that's my old team. Like after
Yes.
COVID, my whole team dispersed, unfortunately. Again, just in summary, and I'm happy to answer other questions if people have them, but I'm looking around the screen. I am seeing each one of you. I've seen you all before. Every single one of you can get better than you are right at this moment. It's just a matter of number one, figuring out where you are at the moment, right? And then moving in the right direction. You know, and again, it's not working harder so much, it's working smarter. So like one thing that's frustrating is like you hear people say, well, I go to the gym every day, but they're not doing the right exercises, right? So there's stuff that as a pulmonary hypertension patient, you have needs that might be slightly different, but some of them are going to be the same. And I just want to show you one other thing on the website where you could find some of these other resources. And again, they're all there for you free of charge. But if you come to the website, so if you go, this is the home page, okay? At the bottom of the home page, we have these different webinars. We'll announce the webinars. This is the long COVID support group. Our mission is a mission. These are all the different topics under education, okay? And you could see that one of them in particular is pulmonary hypertension and heart failure, okay? And then there's stuff written there. There's webinars there. Here's a webinar I did in 2015 with Dr. Horn, if you want to preview, but it's like a whole different world since 2015 in terms of pulmonary hypertension and what's available. And then also here's COVID, coronary disease, airway clearance. There's a lot of stuff here. So feel free to check that out. The rehab, like I said, is here. And there's a 42-day boot camp, and then there's an advanced version. Here's tons of webinars. Okay, so these webinars, here's all the topics, respiratory system, best breathing techniques, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some research that we've done. Here's access to my 3 books. And don't skip the donate page. But feel free to utilize that stuff. It's a ton of information there. It was like a lot to put that together, but it's really everything I've been doing for the last 33 years in one website. It's not a calendar form, but it's at the bottom of the homepage. The different events are coming up. So the next one is going to be next Wednesday. And it's going to be about maximizing activities of daily living. And it's a lot of the stuff that we talked about now. So, you know, I think it could be something that's very valuable for you. But if you go and you register for the, you know, for it, you'll get announcements from me. So I hope that was helpful to you. And are there any other last minute questions? We have 11 minutes left if anybody wants to ask questions, make comments, or give feedback. All yours. Here, this is the section on emotional well-being, and there's also a whole page devoted to emotional well-being. And if you come down here, number one, here's a chapter from my book about stress and anxiety, but then also here's The Healing Power of the Breath by Richard Brown, rehabilitative Tai Chi. I mean, Brian is super calm and zen. Jenny talks about yoga, mindfulness, and meditation. There's really cool stuff here, music therapy. These here are Lori Nadell, who's this whole thing right here. And yeah, I'm biased, of course, but these are all things related to like, what can you control, you know, and what can't you control? Who are you? Turning off the negative. Like, that's your page right there. And if that doesn't work, try Prozac. That's my go-to. But you know, look, we live in stressful times, okay? And it's very stressful to have a chronic illness, especially one where your number one symptom is being unable to breathe. Who wouldn't be stressed in that situation? So the natural state is stress, right? And that's the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, right? So the fight or flight system is like, that's from prehistoric times where, like, if a caveman was out picking berries and a saber-toothed tiger jumps on him, that's designed to put out this adrenaline, and he's either going to fight the tiger and he's going to run away. Either one of those use up the adrenaline, right? That's what it's there for. That system is designed to protect us. But now we watch politics and we have this same reaction as if we just got chased by a bear. But you see, the thing is, because we're watching it on TV and we're not either fighting or fleeing, instead of, you know, the adrenaline helping us, it just constricts all the blood vessels. And so, you know, we have to take steps to combat. Listen, I'm guilty of it myself. We live in stressful times, and it's stressful to have a chronic illness. It's stressful to, you know, COVID was super stressful for all of us. It's stressful to have a business. It's stressful to lose your job, some people have stressful jobs. It's a real thing. But that page, I had forgotten all that was on there at the moment, but there's a lot of stuff on there. Well, that's why your heart rate goes up. That's why your blood pressure goes up when you're under stress.
Absolutely.
The other thing
And
is, if you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain, that also can make you feel bad. The other thing is, and I learned this just a few weeks ago, but it made perfect sense to me, which is that, you know, when you're under stress, your body releases cortisol, right? And it's something that I instinctively knew, but I was like, why do I feel so bad? Like, why do I feel this way? I've never felt this depressed in my life. But when your body releases cortisol, it also depletes serotonin, right? So serotonin is our happy chemical in our body. And that's why, like, things like Prozac are what's called SSRIs, serotonin. I forgot what, I'm forgetting both. One is serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? And the thing is that a lot of this stuff is chemical. So for me, I'm a believer in medicine. I'm a believer in medication, but I'm also a believer in lifestyle and behavior change. And I'm a believer in Western medicine and Eastern medicine. And, you know, really, I say this all the time, but I'm like a Malcolm X rehabilitation specialist. And what I mean by that is by any means necessary. Okay. What's going to work for one of us may be, you know, especially if you're not used to meditating, you could start meditating and you could find it irritating at first, right? You could find it stressful at first. So find the things that you like and that are helpful to you. And one thing that's helpful also is to keep a journal or to keep records of how you feel when you do different things. Because when you think back 2 years, or even sometimes a week or 2 days or 2 hours for some of us, it's hard to remember exactly what's going on. But when you put your feelings and your emotions and your physical feelings to the numbers of heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, then you could start to correlate things and say, hey, guess what? At that time when I felt this, my oxygen saturation was only 80%. Maybe if I would have turned my oxygen up, I wouldn't have felt that. So it's multifactorial. But you need somebody, and you need really good doctors who are going to really look at the big picture, right? Everybody talks about treat the whole person, treat the whole person. Then we get in the office. If you only have 10 minutes to see a doctor, it's hard to treat the whole person, right? Or if you don't have insurance, or you have an insurance that doesn't allow you to get the care, it's hard to treat the whole person. But that's why we try to put out as much as we can on the website to give you many, many different options. And if this doesn't work for you, try this. If this doesn't work for you, try this. But also don't look at it and write it off right away. Don't be like, oh, I can't do this Bollywood dance. You never know. I mean, you may not. It may not be for you. But try it, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to like.
And you know what, I think that that's important too. We need to try, at least try it. And you know, because you never know. You just never know. I want to thank you all for coming. Noah is somebody that we could have on every single day and learn something different and something new every single day. I want to
you.
thank you. Oh,
Thank
no.
you.
Thank
Because
you.
there's
Thank you.
literally hundreds of hours of webinars. There's my books there. I haven't written a book on pulmonary hypertension yet, but only because it's so complex. I mean, pulmonary hypertension is complex. Okay. It's not like asthma. Well, I mean, asthma is complex too, but it's really complex. And that's why it's hard to get a diagnosis. That's why some people are diagnosed so late or never diagnosed. One last thing I'll end on is that, you know, if you do have pulmonary hypertension, or you do have interstitial lung disease, or you do have something that most people don't know what the heck it is when you mention it, really make sure that you're being seen by a specialist, and make sure that you're going to a center of excellence where this is what they do day in, day out, even if it means traveling to go find that, because they can always set up your treatment program and then work with your local doctors. But, you know, pulmonary hypertension is not for the faint of heart. Interstitial lung disease is not for the faint of heart. So, you know, sometimes your heart makes you faint, but the thing is that make sure that the people that you're dealing with are really experts in this, and not somebody who dabbles in it. You can't dabble in pulmonary hypertension.
This is incredibly true. And I found that out the hard way, let me tell you. I want
Yeah,
to thank
most
you
people
all
get
for coming.
misdiagnosed 3 or 4 times or 5
Yeah,
times
I mean,
before
it took me
they get
2
the
years.
right diagnosis. And there's
Took me 2
different
years.
types of pulmonary hypertension, right? And the treatment for one is not the same as the treatment for all. So, all right,
She
I
is
think that's the
talented.
end of hour 2. We take a quick bathroom break and come back for hours 3 to 5. No, I'm
You
just
know what? Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for for just being involved. Where we don't know what Team Phenomenal Hope does not know what we're planning our next years. We are going to definitely ask Noah to come back. So everybody, happy holidays, be well, be safe, be healthy. Go to his website, go to our website, teamphenomenalhope.org, because it also has a lot of information. And thank you all for joining in.